candid conversations, unfiltered opinions, and humor with Abeg Vex podcast.
Hello, welcome. Today, Idongesit Obeya, the host of Abeg Vex podcast. I have Noah Healy with me today. Noah is a market designer, game theorist working on better economic systems. After training in nuclear engineering, he worked for tech startups at the peak of the dot-com boom. Becoming fascinated by the mathematics of information and computation led to Patton's work on a better commodity market design. Welcome, Noah. I'm so happy to have you here. I know we've been chatting a little bit, but please introduce yourself.
Well, thanks for having me here. So as you said, I'm very interested in commodity market design. I've been working in algorithm development and computational math for about a quarter of a century now. I think that computers are the most significant technological creation of humanity to date, and there's a reasonable argument to be made that they are the most profound technological creation we'll ever be able to create. They operate in the space of imagination and thought at the limits of those things, and so it's hard to imagine how we would be able to develop something that is beyond our capacity to imagine. And so I get myself on a podcast to try to educate people about the potentials and the pitfalls. And in particular, what we were talking about just before now, our economic systems are operated through markets which are hundreds of years old and use techniques that are hundreds of years older than that. And those markets are really collapsing in the face of computer technology because there were fundamental flaws in the algorithm, or there are fundamental flaws in the algorithm that was used that are not exposed when everybody in the system is a person. But now that the system is mostly being run by machines at speeds and paces that human beings cannot keep up with, those flaws are being exposed very publicly.
Wow, that's scary. So basically, not only AI, right? Not only the age of the AI, because now there's AI in everything, right? Just moving from the traditional stock trading, for instance, right? Before we started carrying the stock market in our pockets on our cell phones, right? So what you're saying is that these errors were easily concealed. But now with the age of the computerized trading and exchange of money and commodity, it is more profound, and we can see the breakdown or the flaws more. So, but what can be here?
Let me kind of get into that. So the basic notion behind the marketplace is that it's a forum for buyers and sellers to come together.
Right.
And so we think about the deal as the buyer shows up with money and the seller shows up with product, and they agree to some price, and then they exchange the money for the product, and we're good to go. We're done. Like, that happened. So the market just has this forum where it's got these people lined up based on how good the offers they're making are. And when deals get made, the market ensures that the deal happens and then publishes that the deal happened. So if you're a buyer or a seller, or you haven't quite made up your mind, you can show up and see what deals have been made. So, whereas like a century ago, where you might have had the market town where you'd have to go haggle, and
Right.
you don't really know what the last person, what the deal they got. Maybe they're like a friend and the favorite cousin, and they're buying for like half what you're buying for. Like, that's not what happens. Like, you get to see every deal that gets made. When you show up, you have all the information. Well, that's great. It worked fabulous. It worked way better than that. My cousin doesn't have to pay, and like, you used to beat me up in grade school, so we're not gonna, it works way better than that. So anyway, the problem is that people make mistakes. And so the way the market coped with error in the past was somebody comes in, they've got like some bizarre idea of what's going to happen. Maybe they're right, maybe they're wrong. But if they were wrong, they would effectively be in the minority. And because there's only one of them or a few of them, the rest of the marketplace would be able to see and react to that error and effectively punish them for making a mistake. And so it behooved you to, try to keep your head around you, do what would actually look like a good idea.
Right.
And this gets into the hidden assumption that's in this system, because the buyer isn't just showing up with cash, he's also showing up with information. Everybody can see what the market's publishing, but they also know what they know. And so the deal isn't just cash for goods. The deal is cash, goods, and information. And both sides have some information. And then the market also has some information. And computers are information machines. That's what they deal in. So what happens with computers is it becomes possible to make these offers, make these potential deals that don't have to be wrong. They can just be noise. They can be nonsense. They can be confusing. And so what you get, just like if you're talking with your family members, that conversation is very easy. But if you're getting spammed at the same time, then managing all those conversational threads is very difficult. We've been increasing the amount of spam in the marketplaces by a huge factor. And that's essentially all down to the computers. Because whereas in the old days, a lot of people would be able to react faster than a few people, in these days with computers, the market updates at the speed the market updates at. And so the individual can operate as quickly as the marketplace is, as long as they buy enough computer power to do that. And so what happens is we now have hundreds, thousands of firms that have bought themselves basically immunity from market feedback. And those firms, when they make mistakes, either intentionally or unintentionally, don't pay the penalties that historically get paid by bringing mistakes to the marketplace. And so what we have is markets that just are much, much noisier. And the noisier the marketplace is, the more expensive it is to use for the people that can't afford to absorb market risk. And so what we're seeing is the middle is getting wider.
Okay.
And that's ultimately intolerable, because we as human beings, we make stuff that's valuable, many of us, hopefully, and we use things that are valuable. We need to eat, we need clothing, we need shelter. And so the larger the gap between the makers of that which is valuable and the consumers of that which is valuable are, the more creaky and wasteful the whole system gets. And that's what we're seeing over the course of the last third to half century, as the financial system has effectively completely computerized.
Right. So from somebody that is not in the financial sector, right? And, I'm getting to know and learn the marketplace when it comes to trading the stocks and all that kind of stuff, right? So when I hear you speak, and I know we started this conversation with you, an aspect of this conversation going to, traditional marketplace, you may refuse to sell to this person because, this was my cousin who beat me up in school, but, behind the computer and everything, you cannot pick and choose. It just brought me to the new age of currency, as opposed to the traditional currency or, trading for services and things of that nature. So when I say tradition, I'm thinking New York Stock Exchange and, I'm thinking of, Wall Street, right? Then the other side of things, and I'm thinking crypto. Since crypto is a new age child, right, as opposed to the uncles and aunties that have been around, does this also apply to trading cryptocurrency, or does this broken system or this flawed system only apply to like the traditional trading market?
Unfortunately, it does infest cryptocurrency as well. So the
Oh, wow.
cryptocurrency people basically say that the problem with the markets is that the currency that we're using doesn't work very well. And that argument is actually pretty decent. We have a lot of issues with our currencies, particularly some of them are very famously, horrifically bad. But that currency is basically a unit of measurement. So it's like a foot or a centimeter or something like that, except whereas if you've got rulers, hopefully your rulers are made out of something that doesn't change very much. Most currencies are sort of rulers that have been built on silly putty. And some of those rulers are actually not so much silly putty as water or air.
Right.
And so the crypto guys are like, well, what if we made the rulers out of something that was absolutely rock solid? What if we made it out of math? Well, okay, that's a totally reasonable argument. They haven't really solved the math problems that they've claimed to solve, although they're a lot closer than certainly the people that are pitching out the silly putty rulers that everybody actually uses. Unfortunately, they think that that's what the problem with the marketplace is. And that's not what the problem with the marketplace is. The problem with the marketplace is that it is a noise reduction system. It's like your noise canceling headphones or something like that. And as all of those kinds of information systems, true fact about them is that they have an upper limit. If you pump enough noise into the system, it won't work anymore. And so if you're on a phone call and somebody sets off like a feedback whine next to the person you're talking to, if they turn the volume on their feedback whine or white noise generator, whatever it is, up enough, you won't be able to hear the other person in spite of the fact that they'll be able to shout as loud as they want to, because the noise will just drown them out. And that, even if everything that everybody's talking about is, real and not silly putty, if everybody's just getting drowned out by noise and spam that's being produced by these robots that produce noise and spam on the regular, then you get exactly the same problem. And that we will see. You can see that in spite of their claims, and while particularly Bitcoin, for example, is a very impressive value run, it's subject to the same kind of market uncertainty and market unpredictability that everything else is. And so fixing the marketplaces would actually make using existing currencies probably fine. Harder currencies would be better, but there would be incentives for hardening the existing currencies or switching to harder currencies with properly functioning marketplaces. But just changing to a harder currency, whether you're talking about Bitcoin or Ethereum or gold or silver or other platinum group metals, osmium is the densest element there is. We could use that as currency if we wanted to. But that won't help us in a world where most of the market information is fictitious nonsense that's been generated by a machine that pumps fictitious nonsense in order to create the uncertainty and fear that maximizes the returns for people who want to invest.
I just as you were talking, I was thinking of how trading has evolved through the centuries, right? So there was a point where trading was just within people in your local area, and we've come to, with barter trading, right? And that even that sort of trading continued even between countries and continents, and then we moved into currency, and currency was anything that it involved even calories, right? We're talking about gold, silver, and all this precious metals, right? So then we moved into currency, paper currency. Each country, each region, each continent in some cases have their own designated currency, right? Having a figurehead image or whatever on it. Then we moved now to cryptocurrency, which crypto people are making a lot of noise about it. The next big thing, the next best thing. And all of this can be confusing. Like, where does it stop? Where does it end? Or will we ever get to a place where we're satisfied with a particular currency being, the end all and be all? Would there ever come a time where things are stabilized enough that we can, have something that is sustainable and long lasting and beneficial to everybody who uses it?
Well, that gets very political very quickly. So let's distinguish what money and currency are. Money is a medium of exchange, and it effectively is that measuring stick I was talking about before. Currency is a politically established money. So the attempts by the blockchains to become currencies is an attempt to gain a political entity without also gaining a state and the associated military accoutrement of that state. That's an extraordinary challenge. And if you really want to get super dark, it isn't actually possible to use any currency fully privately because you are yourself a public entity. And whenever you engage in a trade, that is ultimately a discoverable fact about the nature of the universe. And so even private transactions, if somebody shows up at your house and opens it up and is like, where did all these canned peaches come from? Well, unless you're living on a peach orchard with a canning factory, they came from somewhere. and you can start walking back like where those came from. And so if there is a blockchain network that the people who have police and nuclear weapons decide that is entirely unacceptable to exist, then really all they have to do is look for people who have a mismatched lifestyle according to the currency systems that are under their control, and then look around and see where it came from. There was a pretty insane case of a corrupt mayor in China I read about a few years ago, where it turned out that this guy had sort of like an entire second house / basement under his standard family home. And he had billions of dollars in gold and cash and other things. He was some kind of massive money laundering thing that he was doing there. And the same sort of thing would go on. It's certainly possible to have like $1 billion of Bitcoin on a thumb drive, but that's obviously completely worthless to you unless you can spend it on things that have value or do something else to leverage the value. And whatever those other things are ultimately are going to be real physical things in the universe. And so if it were to be fully criminalized by an environment that meant it, you would be able to identify those players by simply the fact that they had unregistered, wealth, and just say, well, that's stolen property, and take it away from them, and they wouldn't be able to defend themselves because we're positing that they're not able to defend themselves. So that's a serious cultural problem that the Bitcoin people are claiming. They're essentially claiming to be able to create a currency without the thing, i.e., policing and army power that makes a currency a thing.
Right.
But maybe it'll work out. Obviously, people can have guns and whatever themselves, and we'll see how countries fare in the light of the craziness that we're seeing around us. But that's the separation, is that currencies aren't exactly money. And in terms of like fully stabilizing, that comes down to political unity. There's a quote from Plato: "Only the dead have seen the end of war." Humans have a lot of interest in conflict. If you've got two guys and one's stronger and one's weaker, then the stronger guy could decide that he's not going to take any advantage of that and play fair, or he could decide to, lean on the other person and take things from him. And if you introduce a woman into this scenario, she could decide that getting with the weaker guy and having the stronger guy lean on them and take things away from them is a good move for her. Or she could decide that the stronger guy and having him lean on the other guy and get things taken away from other people and given to her is a good way to go. And historically, we've seen the second of those options be popular among people, leading to, where we are today. It's going to be challenging to develop law in a increasingly computerized, roboticized society to establish fairness. But the thing is, while there are people that are stronger and a lot stronger than other people, there are people that are smarter and a lot smarter than other people. The total amount of brain and muscle mass that exists out in the world is completely overwhelming from any individual or really any organized group perspective. And so creating systems of lawful fairness that allow you to exploit lots and lots of points of view, lots and lots of information, lots and lots of decision making, make way better decisions, make way better plans than any individual can. And so that's the switch. That's why the markets that we use right now are so incredibly culturally dominant. The markets that we presently use were developed in northern Italy just prior to the Renaissance. And at that time, the Eastern Roman Empire, the Byzantines, were the major political and economic unit across the Mediterranean and the Black Sea. And in fact, they owned the choke point between those two things. It was an extraordinarily wealthy and valuable place. And because the markets worked so much better, places like Venice and Genoa and Naples turned into the, tourist trap destinations that they are today because they got richer than Constantinople was, because in spite of the fact that you had to go to some place that's nestled up into the mountains and isn't really a transshipment point to anywhere, the decisions were so much better there that you still made more money going out of your way and maybe having to smuggle past the other guys to do it. And the same thing will happen again if we develop new marketplaces. Right now, you'd mentioned, New York Stock Exchange. New York, Chicago, and London control virtually every benchmark marketplace on Earth. And so, the price of global rice is set in Chicago. Which does not have any rice paddies. The price of global nickel or copper are set in London, in spite of them having no nickel or copper mines. When the French and Chicago disagree about the price of butter, it's because the French don't understand anything about butter, because Chicago decides what the price of butter is. And as we'd mentioned before, cocoa, the price of cocoa is not set in Africa because the market's not there. Now, you could build my system where the information becomes its own interior marketplace. And so the producer comes in my system with product, the consumer comes with currency, the negotiator, which is a hat anybody can put on. Producers can put on a negotiation hat, consumers, but third parties can put on negotiation hats, can bring information. And what we do is we set up a deal that people can choose to participate or not participate in. And so you don't have to do any negotiation or risk. You just get to look at what deals are on offer and what deals are projected to be on offer and decide if you want to expand your business, if you want to participate here or wait until later, if you want to go out of business because it's not really practical to make whatever this is wherever you are. And that system is hundreds of times more efficient algorithmically than this sort of mixed information product money thing that we've been doing for 800 years now.
Wow. So, Noah, you said something that my wheels have kind of been turning, and as I'm listening to you, these noisemakers, right? These noisemakers that are producing this spammy type communication to widen this gap. I know that you're working on the system to address that. I dare to ask who are the primary shareholders behind these noisemakers that are creating a marketplace that is not really equal in a sense?
Okay, sure. Yeah. Well, so these markets developed around actual traders. So these original Italian factors were trading cloth or dyes or spices across the Mediterranean. And as it expanded out, new kinds of markets, industrialization set in, lumber, fur, metals, coal, other things became valuable, and agricultural product. And then the United States turned out to have half the world's arable land. And so we took over most of the agricultural product because we were making most of the agricultural product. So
Was that during the slavery cotton trading and stuff like that?
there was some of that, but actually, the real outgrowth was the expansion into the West, which was coterminous with some of the later slavery period. But it turns out that Illinois, for example, has the world's greatest farmland. There's a confluence of the Mississippi, the Ohio, and the Missouri rivers in that
Right,
region. There's
right,
many other tributary rivers, so the entire region's extremely well irrigated, basically 24/7. There's these very large bodies of water that connect everywhere from the northern Atlantic down to the Gulf of Mexico. So you can put your product on a barge and ship it very inexpensively to anywhere on the planet Earth. And the topsoil is like 25 to 35 feet deep there, which is just unbelievable. Effectively, for several ice ages, the American Central Basin, up until I think it drained from a shallow sea somewhere around 50 million years ago. So the American Central Basin was just a vast grassland that lay fallow for like 50,000 years. And so tens of millennia of bison refuse and dead grass just piled up without anybody using it for anything. And then the European settlers showed up in Conestoga wagons and the Jethro Tull moldboard plow. So like it's not like the Indians didn't have agriculture, but they didn't have the heavy European plow that was actually capable of breaking through the rock hard sod of the Central Plain. And once that switchover happened, the Central Plain went from what had been called at some points the Great American Desert, because you could barely, you couldn't drill a seed into this thing with a hand drill. It became the breadbasket of the world, basically over a couple generations. So that work was actually mostly done by the Midwest, sort of German, Swedish, American settlers that were landing and taking land grants to go out and put together a farm and build it out. And that's what happened there. Anyhow, getting back to
the trading, the Italians,
the
and then the
trading.
Americans. Yes,
So that model of, hey, I've got some stuff, I'm going to come to market. Hey, you got some money, you're going to come to market. That doesn't generate enough churn for the market to provide information that's useful, because the farmers don't show up to market until harvest time,
right.
and the buyers need money. They need wheat all the time because they're going to make flour regularly so that bread makers can keep bread. It's not like people are going to just eat bread in early
In the
spring
fall.
and then get out of the bread business until wheat grows again. Like,
Right.
we want our toast with butter on it right now. Um, so we're going to get that. That's what this is for, right?
Right.
So what happens is, when not a lot of people are showing up to the marketplace, it's very unsteady. because the market, remember, is only publishing the deals that happen. So if deals aren't happening, you show up and you're like, in the last 10 seconds, 500 deals have happened, and here's where they are, and they're all pretty stable. And you're like, great, that's what the price is. You show up and they're like, well, there's a guy here 2 weeks ago and he got 50, but then there was a guy here a week before that and he got 95. And you're like, well, what's the price then? He's like, well, figure it out. You know, there's some people over there that might give you some money. Maybe it'll be 50, maybe it'll be 95. Well, if you're running a farm, you're going to go bankrupt like that. And so what happens is an evolved niche occurred of middlemen.
Okay.
And the middlemen really, the transfer of the markets. So the central advancing economy of the world was Renaissance Italy. And then it became Amsterdam. Around the time that the Spain was pulling the New World silver and gold out, they were using Amsterdam as their deep water port. And these guys managed to figure out how to become middlemen real quick, because these ships that were stacked up with, you know, gold coins and silver bars were coming into port every day. And they were like, let me get some of that. So they invented stock markets like the New York Stock Exchange. They invented how to turn a business into a commodity and use these commodity markets that the Italians had to trade businesses. And they figured out how to cut off a little piece for themselves so they could do okay out of the business. And what they discovered is that if the market shows up every day and is just trading all the time, then when the hick shows up, the prices are already there for them. Right. And so what you do is you're providing hedges. You're providing insurance, basically. And that's become very much the way of the world. You've got these groups that have deeper pockets. They can afford to take a little bit of a risk. They can make 10 bets and they can lose 1 and win 9. And that's fine for them. And so that's what they do. Well, let's say you're running an insurance company in a town. You're given like homeowners fire insurance, and you'd like people to spend more for fire insurance. What could you do? Well, arson. You could do arson.
Start the fire.
Yeah, if homes are burning up, maybe people want fire insurance more.
There we go.
And so we have this large group of people that was offering insurance against market instability. The more unstable the markets get, the more they charge for that insurance, because they got to make money. And in the old days, if they were to try to pretend like the market was totally crazy, that would cost them so much money. And expose them to so much risk, they'd get blown away for stuff like that most of the time. There's some really famous counterexamples, but I'm not going to get into that. However, these days, the computer can put something up and pull it back in a millionth of a second. And they can chase these things around and form a little bit of a flutter and then turn it off and on again, and watch your thing come in, slow as molasses, and change the market just before it gets there, and then turn it back on again, all that kind of stuff. And so that's the noise. And that noise, it doesn't cost them anything. And so whether they're doing it intentionally or they're just doing it, and because there's not a negative feedback signal, there's no reason for them to stop. It doesn't really matter. It's causing the markets to become less and less stable. And as we've quite recently seen, that low stability has the potential permanently to metastasize and cause broad chaos. But there's nothing special. There was 87, 88, the major market crash, which this is now finally bigger than. But that had been the single largest market day crash in human history. Was coincident. That market crash back in the 80s was the first day that the New York Stock Exchange went over 1 million units in volume traded.
Wow.
And they'd been creeping up. It'd been, there'd been 8 handles, and then there were 9 handles for a long time, and those 900,000 handles were going up. And then the nightly news, I can remember it pretty clearly. They had a little segment where they were like, here's the market thing, and the screen came up, and it was, down whatever percent, 1, comma numbers, not 900 comma numbers. And they didn't report that. That's not part of the narrative, that the market scaled up and it went sideways. But, I remember seeing that happen. And as an algorithmic specialist and a person that thinks about scale quantitatively, I got to tell you, that's very strongly indicative. And that's what we're seeing. We're seeing more and more people are getting onto these systems. You're talking about, everybody can have it in their cell phones these days.
Right.
That's noise too. And so all of that is just breaking the system more. And how much breaking can the system take? Well, we don't know. We're finding that out, all of us.
Right. So, all of those things, the hedge fund managers or the hedge funds, watching the candles, all of these things are things that I've learned very recently. And it's quite fascinating, right? And the people that live for that risk, right? The people that enjoy that up and down, the people that have mastered, putting in the stop losses, not making them physical rather than mental stop loss, because you know what? The market or the big banks are watching everybody have those stop losses to use it as an advantage to either tank the market or, send those candles up, the calls, the puts, and all those things. So my question to you is that there are people that live for that excitement, right? Riding that wave, watching those candles, when do I sell? When do I, buy, and all those things. With this fix, would it take the fun or the excitement out of the cell phone traders, the option traders, and the people that are watching the calls, the puts, and all of that fancy stuff, right? So what does that mean for the average person? What does that mean for the big boys, that are doing it in the large establishment, the big boys and girls, I should say?
So yeah. So the adrenaline junkies are going to have to go, base jumping or upgrade their meth habit or whatever it is that they need to do.
Okay.
Like they're not going to be able to get that thrill anymore once the market's designed to actually function again, because they're getting off on the noise. They are, for all practical purposes, arsonists. A lot of arsonists sadly have a fixation where they're in love with fire. And so it's a very high recidivism type of thing. Similar type of deal here. An unfortunate percentage of the people that are blowing up the global economy are doing it because they find it enjoyable. And unfortunately, they also find it profitable so that they can keep doing it. If we make it unprofitable, they would still like to blow up the global economy, but they'll lose all their money very rapidly, and then they'll have to go find some less expensive way to get their kicks. However, some of these people are aggregating important information. If you're familiar with the film The Big Short, there are people that were doing the work and doing the research and working out that, things were not kosher anymore and that a big change was going to come. And that's also very valuable. There are drones and satellites that are analyzing global climate and soil conditions around the world so that people can bet into these markets in more profitable ways. And doing that leads to better information so that farmers and factory owners can plan their businesses and be more profitable. And so that's valuable. That will continue. And that will become more valuable because you won't be competing against this noise factory. You'll be able to be compensated for providing information that turned out to be valuable across the entire marketplace, not just one poor dumb sod that happens to get knocked off by your trading strategy. So some of the big people will do fine. Some of them will do actually better. Most of them will not.
Okay.
The other big win for the bigs is the market operator. Current market operators impose less than 0.5% of the costs on the transactions. Their transaction fees are very cheap, and they're getting a very small fraction of the value of what they're providing. With my system, they would be able to take a much larger chunk of that while still underpricing other marketplaces because of how much more efficient things are. So it would be possible very easily, in fact, for somebody to compete with the CME group, take 10 times the revenue that the CME group did as a percentage of the trades that they were facilitating,
Right.
and offer the sort of farmers and factory owners a 90% discount compared to the transaction costs the CME group was actually charging them, and do both of those things at the same time, because that's just how much loose crap is in the system right now. And then for those people that are in the farming business and other commodity product business, right now transaction costs are larger than the average rate of return of the operation of commodity production business. So producing commodities, you might have a profit margin of about $1.07. Transaction costs are more like $1.06. So cutting transaction costs in half, you could see a 56% increase in profitability on average across an entire industry. And if you think about what happens to a small business when their profits go up 56%, that's pretty profound.
Right. It sounds like a win all around for everybody who's doing the right thing, right? It sounds like a win all around for, start to finish, the farmers, the factory workers, the buyers, the big banks who are doing the right thing, right? It sounds like a win all around. What do you think the resistance is on buying into your system or accepting your system for what it is? You did clearly say that some will not fare well, right?
Yeah,
But
sure.
people that are doing the right thing. So why is this not something that is highly supported? And, because I want everybody to win. You and I want everybody to win. Everybody who's doing the right thing, right?
Right,
So
exactly.
what's the deal?
Well, I have to say that I definitely thought that it would be hard, but I thought the sale would be a lot easier than this. There are some confusing things. Number one, change is rough for everybody. Nobody really likes change. Um,
Absolutely.
Also, I don't have any relevant reputation, and that makes this a harder sell as well. And this comes out of complete left field. So that sort of zero reputation left field thing, many of the people that are in the system and really across the board, people are very reluctant to think with their own brains. They want people that they already respect to have chewed up knowledge and provided it to them, preferably in terms of what they've already done. And so that creates a very big chicken and egg. But sadly, for people that are actually willing to like sit still long enough to hear me out and walk through it, I get an enormous amount of pushback on number one, making large amounts of money. Lots of people who are quite wealthy are extremely reluctant to make large amounts of money. That I'm not entirely certain what the source of that is, but that's
That doesn't
something.
make sense.
Yes, that's something I've seen that makes no sense. Another even more disturbing block is that many of them are, in fact, not interested in everybody doing the right thing being better off. They're explicitly repelled by ethical behavior, if you will, and some of them have said so in so many words that if this was a way to steal like $1 billion, they would be in. But a way to actually make and improve things by trillions of dollars, it's like, nope, that's not what we do here.
So, is there like an appeal to keep the poor poor and the wealthier wealthier? Could that be it?
I can't really say on that one. There definitely is a sort of class social position aspect to certain things. So the very wealthy people I've spoken to, and I haven't gotten to very many of those within the system, they occupy a niche of extraordinary social power and economic power and political power. And so, if you shuffle a deck of cards, you don't know where any given card's going to end up, but you know that the cards at the top of the deck are probably not going to still be at the top of the deck. And so when you're talking to those people, they're extremely reluctant to do any deck shuffling maneuvers because it's almost impossible for something like that to help them.
Mm-hmm. Okay, it makes sense. It's self-preservation in a sense, right? So again, if they're running in the same circle of people, even if they're doing the right thing and their peers are not, who wants to find a new set of friends at 80 or 70, right? So
Sure.
it's kind of like, for lack of a better way to put it, when celebrities get divorced, the one thing in the line of divorce for alimony and spousal support is, to preserve the life that they've become accustomed to. So it's just a way of preserving the life that they've become accustomed to, regardless of it's the right thing to do or not. So I get that piece. Does it make sense? No, it doesn't make sense. Does it benefit everybody? No, it doesn't. But, humans have a tendency to be selfish, and, it's human.
Absolutely, yeah. Well, that gets into the thing is change is going to happen whether they want it to or not. As we're now seeing with the markets going totally crazy, this system that we have is collapsing and will eventually fall apart because the problem isn't that they're greedy or incompetent. The problem is that the algorithm doesn't work at the scale that the humanity's reached. And so unless
True.
we pull back our scale and revert to a simpler time when there were billions of fewer human beings that didn't have access to computers and communication, back when the system worked, which I cannot support that at all.
Right.
We're going to change because the system itself is going to disintegrate. And a recent example of this that's less well known is the cocoa market. So cocoa, of course, is a New World product.
Yes, it
It
is.
grew in the Andes, and it's got very specific requirements. It turns out that it needs enormous amounts of water, but its roots rot very rapidly. So you have to grow it in basically sand, like perfectly drained soil, where it rains like a foot plus a day all the time. And there's not a lot of places on Earth that have, the worst soil possible and a perpetual water source. So the Ivory Coast region of Africa, Hawaii, of course, the regions of the Andes Mountains where they originally evolved are pretty much it. And those locations all grow a lot of cocoa because, as it happens, for anyone who's ever eaten chocolate, it's pretty tasty. So there's been some fluctuation for a few years now. I believe the Ivory Coast and maybe some other nations as well cut off exports to Switzerland. So the cocoa life cycle, the cocoa seed pod is a pretty big sort of footballish shaped, and that's American footballish shaped object that has a bunch of mucilage and cocoa beans in it. And so you pick those and then you lay them out under cocoa leaves to ferment for a little while, and then you open them up and you can get the beans, and then you got to roast the beans and process them into cocoa powder, the highest quality of which is called Dutch cocoa powder, because those very rich guys in Amsterdam that were figuring out how to turn the
Right.
Spanish gold into their personal. They were some of the earliest people to figure out outside of Central America that chocolate tastes really good, particularly when you add milk and cream and sugar to it.
Yes.
And so they came up with the Dutch process, which we use to this day with some alterations.
Yummy.
And then those cocoa products, that cocoa powder, you can extract the oils, and of course, some of the world's best chocolatiers are in Central Europe. Places like Switzerland and again the Netherlands. And so they buy these cocoa beans for like pennies to dollars a pound, and then they sell dark Swiss chocolate bars for hundreds of dollars a pound. And the people that are growing that stuff are like, well, we would like to sell chocolate for hundreds of dollars a pound. That would be a real boost to our economy. But they need to do that. They have to build the factories, the expertise to do the processing, to pull themselves up that value chain. And so there's been some fights. Apparently this year, there's been some very bad weather in Ghana for cocoa, which I assume equates to clear and sunny is what would be bad for cocoa, actually. So
No water.
right, yeah. So bad weather is actually good weather or something.
Right.
But at any rate, there's been a fairly big production miss this year, and as a result of that, I was reading an article a few weeks ago. The cocoa market's been in pretty serious disarray, 10% swings one way or another. And in an environment where your profit margins are probably somewhere between like 5 and 20%, a 10% price swing is somewhere between half of your potential profits and going from making the amount of money you were going to make to losing that amount of money. So that's a pretty big deal. And there's some expert opinion that believes that cocoa will be going up by more than 150% by the time we actually manage to figure out this like agreement among ourselves. Maybe that'll happen, maybe it won't. But I saw that and went and looked up who the Ghanaian, cocoa ministry economists were, and I sent out some cold calls, and I got a response back, and had a brief chat with a guy that does economics in Ghana cocoa adjacent stuff, and so I'll be working with him hopefully. But you'd mentioned you had actual family in Nigeria that was in cocoa
Right.
production.
Right. So I do have family in Nigeria that does cocoa production as well on both sides, So the areas that I'm from and my husband is known for cocoa production and cocoa farming. When we got talking before we got on this call, and now that you have talked a little deeper into what is going on with the cocoa market, wouldn't it be prudent that, yes, the Western world, because I'm going to do it the Western world, because I know a lot of natural resources comes from Africa. Each Africa country has a wealth of natural resources that the Western world just enjoys, right? Okay.
Yeah.
So wouldn't it be prudent that if you have the refineries, if you have the factories, if you have the skill set, if you have the machineries to process whatever, and you don't have the product itself, and I have the product for you to go ahead and, show your skills to the world, wouldn't it be prudent for you to be fair so that you can continue? We both can continue enjoying this natural resource that, the continent of Africa was blessed with. Because we can name them all, including crude oil, right? Including crude oil. Palm oil is produced in Africa, and also I think Thailand is the other big producing country. I forget what other country produces palm oil in a large quantity. But these are resources that are found in almost everything that the Western world enjoys, from soap to the product, the perishable and non-perishable products on the shelves. In talking about your system and how it would help to stabilize the market and, level the playing field in a sense and be fair, not level it, be fair. Wouldn't this be a prudent thing to do about paying people in a way that makes sense, right? As
Yes,
opposed to
yes,
nickel
yes.
and diming
It very
somebody,
much would be.
right?
Yes.
Don't
Um,
nickel and dime us. Don't nickel and dime me. Pay me in a way that makes sense. If you're selling my chocolate bar, a chocolate that came from me for hundreds of dollars, and you just got a whole bag from me for barely a dollar, anything below $5, right? The profit margin doesn't make sense in comparison to how you're treating me, right? Wouldn't that
in
make
many
sense?
cases, yeah. I mean, this is a pretty serious issue. There's other even more egregious marketplaces. Cobalt, for example, is an extremely important mineral with the attempt to electrify everything, even stuff that definitely shouldn't be electrified.
Right,
But the major exploited cobalt mines these days are in Central Africa, which has a really serious slavery and human rights problem, and that's led to mass exploitation. And nobody really cares
right.
at over on the buying a new electric vehicle side of things, that's what you're doing it on the backs of.
Yeah,
So we've got a lot of issues. To me, with this technology, an opportunity now exists for primary production economies, which a lot of names have occurred over the last century for that. But you know who you are, basically, if the important thing about your country is that you're exporting raw materials. And not all of those countries, I mean, places like New Zealand and Australia make a lot of their money by exporting raw materials.
right.
So it's not,
But it's
it's
done fairly. It's
right.
done in a way that
Well,
also benefits
I
the
wouldn't go
economy,
as far as
right?
that.
Okay. Okay.
Everybody,
Got
everybody's
it.
getting really screwed by having to use these marketplaces.
Got it.
um, there's a suicide epidemic in the United States among
Yes.
farmers. Yeah, I mean, you don't have to be, a different color and a different religion on the other side of the world to be on the wrong side of this thing. You just have to not be one of these adrenaline jacked insiders that's throwing hundreds of billions of dollars around to pretend like the world's on fire so that they can make more money. And so anyway, right now, establishing a marketplace the way marketplaces are currently designed is essentially a fool's errand. If Nigeria was to set up their own competitive cocoa market, because they wouldn't have the same amount of currency flow through themselves, deal flow through themselves, they would not be able to establish prices as well as the markets that are in Europe that actually set the benchmark. And so what would happen is that the locals would abandon those marketplaces and use the European markets, in spite of the fact that the deals aren't that great, because they would, in some not being that great, they'd be better than the local markets could compete. With my technology, with the CDM, it becomes possible to create local markets that will be able to develop information that's at least as good and usually better than those existing benchmarks. And so that would allow a Nigeria to potentially become a regional benchmark, or maybe just become their own local marketplace that can negotiate a at scale, effectively create a bilateral collective negotiation between buyers and sellers, and figure out what fair is. Fair, maybe $5 a pound, maybe $3.50 a pound is actually fair once those people make their decisions about how their businesses work. Maybe $15 a pound is fair. Like, I don't know the answers that people will come up with out of their own economic needs and own businesses, but I can provide the mechanism that allows building a forum to find out what that answer is and allow people to operate their businesses at what that answer is. And that's a radically more profitable and productive way to operate these businesses. And that really does that would climb up the value chain, because right now we grow cocoa in basically everywhere that it's economically feasible to grow cocoa.
Right.
If prices came up by a factor of, I don't know, 2, which would be insane. If you're making commodity products and you can sell them for twice as much, you can go from a 15% margin to 115% margin. Suddenly, you're looking better than tech stocks are.
Right.
That's crazy. But if that happens, maybe building greenhouses in Iceland, with desalination plants, it's a good way to make cocoa, because Iceland makes a lot of bananas. And let me tell you, bananas do not grow natively in Iceland.
Yeah, I wouldn't think they do.
Yeah.
But it just, this is such a great conversation that we're having. So with your system, the CDM, right? So do you think your system is more effective on a grassroots level or more on an establishment level? Because when we're talking about that, we understand that there are stakeholders and decision makers that may not want this to be a general benefit because of the personal benefit that they're getting, okay, from stifling the market the way that it is, right? So would you say on a grassroots level, on a farmers association level, or exporters, or economic advisor level, that this can be established, or it has to be something that is establishment available on like a national level?
Uh, so it does require a few dozen participants on each side to get sort of
Get
statistical
the
usage
buy-in.
buy-in up. But think about how many different cocoa farms are in Nigeria.
Right.
Needing to get like 25 to 50 of them on board, first off, is still very grassroots type scale. Um,
Right.
in terms of the benefits, it's down to roles. This marketplace has 4 roles on offer, and people that are capable of occupying one or more of these roles benefit from doing so. So the roles in a CDM are the operator, that they get to have a market that's less expensive to operate, less expensive to regulate, and generates more revenue than existing markets do. Then you've got the negotiator. They get to exploit their information in the marketplace and not buy the existing market. You exploit your information through counterparties. So the two of us make a deal. Is it a good deal? Well, we made it, so we both thought so. But one of us might be more right than the other one. And so if I've got better information than you, the deal probably favors me. And if you've got more information than me, the deal probably favors you. And if I've got more information than people in general, I'm one of these middle guys that's doing stuff, I can
Mm.
make a whole bunch of deals and in general make money from each of the people that I trade with. Okay. But I can't make money from all the people I don't trade with. And most of the people in the market are people I'm not trading with, because there's an enormous scale through the system. What CDM allows you to do is you're taking a smaller piece, but everybody that trades is paying for the information. And so it's not finding a position where you can find people that are effectively dumb enough to take bad deals from you. It's creating a better deal for everybody. And if you're capable of doing that, you get a piece of commission of every trade that happens. And so that can actually add up to much, much more money for these skilled, informed negotiators. And then you've got the producers. They get a stabilized marketplace that's trying to maximize their profits, because that's what's going to draw producers. And then the consumers get a stabilized marketplace that's trying to maximize their desire to buy, which for most commodity product, people aren't buying it to eat it. They're buying it for their own factories, which means effectively it's trying to maximize their profits as well.
Yeah.
Um, and so that can exist at a lot of levels. You could have a farmers association get rolling and then have that grow out and become major. You could have a trade association, sort of a regional type of thing. You could have a nation. Everybody except for the US and the UK is effectively outsourcing their financial economy to the US and the UK. And we're actually cross-trading as well because the UK has the industrial metals and we've got all the agriculture. So people in the UK that are eating food are paying us for figuring that out. And people in the United States that are building stuff out of metal are paying the UK to figure that out. So if, Nigeria, which is one of the world's major oil producers, as you point out,
Yes.
also, you guys have, 100 million people. You got a lot of stuff going on there. So
Yeah.
from fish to cocoa to oil and whatnot, if you wanted to stop outsourcing your market negotiation, the government could set up CDMs and create a stabilized internal economy that was more profitable and
Right.
could potentially become the regional benchmarks if they do a better job at it, or if other local companies decide not to engage in that and simply use the established ones that are there. Or, like as I said, I'm talking to the guy in Ghana, maybe they would do it.
Wow, this is such a great conversation, Noah. And I want us to really talk about this some more because there are people that I would like to bring into this conversation. There's a lot. There's a lot to be done. There's a lot to do. There's a lot to learn, and change is not always easy. But it starts with one person. One of the things that Nelson Mandela, he said so many things. It's like if you cannot change the world, make a dent in it, right? And it all starts with a conversation, right? All starts with a conversation. This might not change today, tomorrow, next week, even in our lifetime. But you know what? We're starting with a conversation. And, you never know who's listening. You never know who's willing. You never know who's just waiting to jump in. So I thank you so much for sitting with me today. And this is not going to be the last of this conversation because I am going to go and do my homework. I'm going to do my studying so that we can have this, on a deeper scale. Maybe we just pick just one industry next time and just delve deeper into it about the benefit that your system, the CDM, can have on it. So this was great.
Yeah. This was very enjoyable for me. And
Yes.
I'd very much look forward to doing a follow-up with you sometime.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. So thank you, everybody. We would love for people to get involved in this conversation. Noah, are you on LinkedIn or anywhere? Where can people find you?
Yeah, absolutely. So you can find me on LinkedIn. Contact me directly at noahphealy@yahoo.com. I've got a white paper that you can download. There's a website called cordis.com where you can learn more about this. There's a video explaining it that's on YouTube. I've got a podcast where I talk about AI with the former CTO of Reddit and sorts of impacts it's having. And for people that would like to offer me a little bit of encouragement and support, there's a petition up on change.org. And if you sign that would be fantastic. Share
Beautiful.
it out. So there's a bunch of different ways to find out more about me and what I'm doing. And Google search. There aren't very many Noah Healys in the world, and I'm older than the other one. So
I love it. So for anybody who's interested, all of Noah's information I am going to include with this podcast, wherever we're publishing it, and also on all the social media that we're on. So if you're interested in having this level of conversation with Noah, please reach out to him and, get engaged. Tell us what you think. We want this conversation to continue. So thank you, Noah. We want to have this conversation, you and I, again. And thank you, everybody, for listening.
Thanks for tuning in to Abeg Vex podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to subscribe, rate, and leave us a review. It really helps us out. We'd love to hear your thoughts and continue the discussion. So join us on social media or drop us a message. Until next time, keep exploring, stay curious, and keep pushing the boundaries of your world.